Who are the BC Conservatives, and what role could they play in BC's likely upcoming fall election? I ask this because some of their candidates are up to some wild anti-LGBTQ2S+ stuff lately. And yet we also just saw openly queer MLA Eleanor Sturko cross the floor to join the party. This week, BC Conservative candidate Damon Scraggs stepped down after a series of social media posts over recent years emerged where he said Pride is for, quote, degenerates, and that queer people are trying to, quote, seduce straight folks. And this kind of situation is something I'm pretty familiar with, having grown up in Alberta in the era of the gay Lake of Fire Wild Rose Party candidate. But this, happening in BC in 2024? Meet the BC Conservatives, a formerly fringe party that is now on the rise ahead of this fall's provincial election, truly on the back of some wild timing with the province's other right-wing party and the rise of Pierre Poilievre federally. Since the 1950s, BC has been a province of two major parties, the NDP, who currently lead the province, and the BC Liberals. Now, these Liberals have typically been a bit more conservative than your federal Trudeau-led Liberals, and recently haven't really claimed any direct connection to the federal Liberals. The BC Liberals led the province for a massive length of time until 2017, when the NDP took power. And because the BC Liberals, who are more conservative than the federal Liberals, don't really want to be associated with Trudeau and co., they decided to change their name to what is, let's be real, the most generic political party name ever, BC United. And that may have proven to be a huge mistake. Because while this was happening, the formerly fringe BC Conservatives were going through a makeover. Conservative commentator Aaron Gunn ran for the BC Liberals provincially, but was disqualified for, quote, being inconsistent with the BC Liberal Party's commitment to reconciliation, diversity, and acceptance of all British Columbians. Aaron Gunn then founded Common Sense BC, an advocacy group that pushed to find a more right-wing alternative to the BC Liberals. And that group endorsed a bunch of younger, further right-wing and socially conservative candidates in the BC Conservative Party's board elections in 2022. And party boards are what help decide party direction. So when those candidates won, essentially they took over the party from the old guard, brought with them a facelift and a new logo and some new policies. MLA John Rustad crossed the floor in February of 2023 to join these plucky new Conservatives and was acclaimed as the party leader in March. Then in September, Bruce Banman crossed the floor as well, giving the Conservatives 2 MLAs in the legislature and therefore official party status. And all of this was happening alongside Pierre Poilievre and the federal Conservatives surging in the polls. So the BC Conservatives have been trending up. So much so that in fact they've passed BC United, again, the former BC Liberals who ruled the province for almost 3 decades, in polling. And while the BC Conservatives are still polling well below the governing, more left-wing NDP, they have very suddenly become a legitimate thing in the province. If an election were held today, they would likely be the official opposition. So it's worth paying attention to these candidates and these anti-LGBTQ statements and positions. Because even though they were a fringe party a year ago, and they have candidates calling Pride a mental illness factory, or attending events for anti-LGBTQ churches, or speaking out against radical gender ideology and violent trans extremism, which, by the way, those last two are still candidates for the party, they could be elected, or at the very least they could guide a lot of the narratives and storylines around the coming election. And that is worth paying attention to.